what do we do when we come face to face with an overwhelming task? There's all sorts of different reactions we can have when we come to an overwhelming task. There's tasks like, I think for myself, when we made the decision we were going to move to America to go to Bible school, that was an overwhelming task. When when you make the decision, you think, okay, that's great, we'll do that. Then you contact the visa office and you get all the forms that you need to fill out, and you're looking at this great big pile of forms, all these things that you need to do, all these meetings that you need to have to get your visa organized. It very easily becomes an overwhelming task. Or maybe sometimes the dishes can become an overwhelming task if you leave them for too long and they start piling up, and you just look at them and you think, it's just too overwhelming. What do we do when we come face to face with overwhelming tasks? I think there's a few different reactions. Maybe we're the kind of people who we say, okay, I'm going to prioritize. I'm going to look at this task, I'm going to break it down into smaller tasks. And then I'll look at that and I'll just start slow, start with the small things, and then work my way up so I can get through the overwhelming tasks. Maybe you're the kind of person who can just look at an overwhelming task and say, I'm just going to get it done. I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to start, and then I'll carry on and get through it. Or maybe you're like me and you just panic and stress and close your eyes and hope it goes away. That's probably more my way of dealing with it. But we've all likely experienced various overwhelming tasks. We've looked at something and thought, this is just such a big task, I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can manage this task. And how we look at them, how we look at those tasks is going to make a huge difference in how we handle them. Whether we're the kind of person who breaks it down into small ones where we get it done, or we just close our eyes and hope it goes away. In Matthew chapter 9, as was just read for us, Matthew chapter 9, verse 35 and 36, Jesus faces what seems to be an overwhelming task. He looks at the task ahead of him, and it is an overwhelming task. As it says in verse 35, Jesus was going through the cities and villages, teaching in the synagogues, proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. That's the work he was doing. He was involved in it. He was doing it daily. He was engaging in this kind of work. Then in verse 36, he says, seeing the people, he felt compassion for them, because they were distressed and dispirited, like sheep without a shepherd. He was doing this work, but as he was here in the flesh and doing it in the capacity that he was, he looked out and he saw there were still so many people who were dispirited, so many people who still had these sicknesses, so many people who were still struggling. And Jesus is the only one doing this work. Jesus is the only one who's preaching the gospel of the kingdom. He's the only one who's going out and healing these diseases and these sicknesses. So Jesus is looking at this like, all these people with all these problems, and I'm the only one here who's actually doing this work. I think for anyone, that would be an overwhelming task. For anyone, even clearly the Son of God, that looks like an overwhelming task. So what Jesus does is he turns to his disciples and he gives them an illustration. In verse 37, he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. This is the illustration I want to look at this morning. I want to look at this passage and look at this short illustration that Jesus gives of a harvest with a great promise, but a great problem. And we'll look at that in 2 points. The promise that the harvest is plentiful, and the problem that the workers are few. Excuse me. So let's get into our text. Let's look at that firstly with the great promise. The harvest is plentiful. So Jesus uses this illustration as particularly an agricultural illustration, the idea of a harvest. In that particular culture, that would be a great many people there who would be harvesters, who would be farmers, and be very familiar with the hard work of farming and the hard work of harvesting. You know, particularly in Jesus' day. We think of it today, we think of the hard work of harvesting today. Farming is still a hard job. It's work with your hands. It's work with your, it's real labor. that you have to do with farming. But today we have like quite a lot of machines. That means you can do it at such a large scale, and you have all the comforts of modern technology and things like that that can help with the task. That's not to say it's an easy task now, but certainly it was a lot harder in Jesus' day. During the time of Christ, the work of harvesting was a difficult job. You'd go out in the heat of the day, and you'd be working with your hands and hand tools and things like that. You'd be doing all these different tasks and hard labor. And I think, when I think of my life, I've done a lot of different jobs. I've done all sorts of different work. I've done nothing like farm work, nothing like that at all. Nothing like, the kind of labor that comes with working with your hands, and certainly nothing like the farm work that would be involved during Jesus' time. So he's saying, by saying the harvest is plentiful, he's saying there's a lot of work to be done. The harvest is a difficult work, but he's also saying that there's a large opportunity here. Yes, it's hard work. Yes, the harvest is hard work, but you do it for a reason. Why does a farmer go out and harvest? He does so because he gets the spoils of the harvest. He gets the grain because there's something to be gained from it. I think, how many of us would like to do our job for free? Would like to do what we do on a daily basis, and I said, I'm just happy to do that without getting paid, without being able to support my family. Maybe we have enjoyable jobs. Maybe we have jobs that we like doing. But I imagine there'd be very few of us who'd say, I'd happily do that without getting paid. I'd happily do that without being able to support my family, without getting the food that I can eat as a result of my work. That's why people do harvesting. They harvest because there's spoils from harvest. So this is not just Jesus saying there's a lot of work. He's saying there's a lot of opportunity. He's saying there's a great promise. The harvest is plentiful. And of course, Jesus is using this illustration not just talking about he's not talking about wheat here. He's not talking about grain. He's of course using this illustration about the souls of people. He's talking about souls. He's saying there is work of evangelism that needs to be done. There is work of preaching the kingdom that needs to be done. And he's saying it's hard work. He's saying it's difficult. It's going to take a lot of energy to get this work done. He's saying there's this huge crowd of people, and he's seeing so many problems. He's seeing these people who are sick, these people who are distressed, these people who are like sheep without a shepherd, he says. And he's looking at that and he's saying, there's so many opportunities to teach the gospel. There's so many opportunities here to tell people about the good news of the kingdom, the coming good news of the kingdom, about Christ and his sacrifice and what he's going to do. This was a primary concern for Jesus. As he's looking at all these people with all these problems, he doesn't necessarily see all the little issues, all the little problems that are going on there. What he sees is opportunities to save souls. And this is Jesus' primary concern. This is what Jesus came to earth for. In Luke chapter 19 and verse 10, Jesus says, "For the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which is lost." That was his purpose. That was his reason for coming here to this earth, to seek and to save the lost. That's what he was concerned about. So he looks at this great crowd and sees many opportunities to teach the gospel. That was the promise that Jesus saw there. The harvest is plentiful. And I think today we can see that the same thing is going on. Today we can look at the world and see that the harvest is plentiful. This world has a lot more lost souls than it does saved souls. Just like in the time of Christ, we look at this world and we see there are more lost people today than there are saved people today. And the problem's getting bigger. The problem's not getting smaller as we go on. We see there are more people who we can't keep up with how many people who are. You've got more people being born. We've also got more people who are leaving the church and becoming lost again. And the more people we bring to Christ, we're not we're not fixing the problem. We're not making it, we're not doing this major work of changing it, that the harvest will no longer be plentiful. It's an overwhelming task. It's something we look at all that's going on around us, and we see that the job is just, it's a big job, and the job keeps getting bigger. So how do we look at that overwhelming task? As Christians today, how do we look at that? A lot of it's very easy for us to look at that and become overwhelmed and stress, close our eyes, and hope the problem goes away. To say, there's too many lost souls, and I can't make a difference in that. I can't change the problem. We could look at it and become overwhelmed by this, but rather we should look at it the way Christ does and say the harvest is plentiful. What an opportunity there is. There's so many people out there, so many people who we could be preaching the gospel to. What an opportunity. What a great harvest. What we need to be doing as Christians, as individuals, we need to be, and as a church, corporately, we need to look up and see the lost souls around us. You know, there's a corresponding passage to the one in Matthew chapter 9. It's in John chapter 4. John chapter 4 and verse 35, where Jesus is saying effectively the same sort of thing, talking about this plentiful harvest. He says in John chapter 4 and verse 35, he says, "Do not say there are yet 4 months and then comes the harvest. Behold, I say to you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for that they are white for harvest." He's saying, don't keep your head down and just say, well, the harvest time isn't yet. We'll deal with it when it comes to it. He's saying, lift up your eyes and look around you. See the lost souls that are in your own life and in your own community. As you think about the Toowoomba community and you think about the people who are in this world, would you say there are more lost people or more saved people in this community? Or maybe if you just make it smaller. Think about your own neighborhood, the people who live around you. Are there more lost people in your neighborhood or saved people in your neighborhood? Or even if you make that smaller, think about your own workplace. Are there more lost people where you work than there are saved people where you work? For me, I can answer that very easy. I work in a very good environment. I work with a lot of saved people. But I imagine for most of us, as we think about our work environments, we think about our colleagues, we probably work in an area where when we lift up our eyes and we look around us, we're not looking at saved souls, we're looking at a white harvest. We're looking at people who have yet to hear the gospel. We're looking at people who still need to hear God's word preached to them, who still need to hear about Christ and what he's done for them. We need to look up and see that the harvest is plentiful. And sometimes we're so preoccupied with other things, and sometimes they're good things. Sometimes we're so preoccupied with the good works of the church and the benevolence of the church and making sure we're all looked after here. You know, that's a good thing that we ought to be doing. But sometimes we can get so preoccupied with things. Sometimes we can get so preoccupied with even studying God's word and, for myself, preparing sermons and preparing classes, and I can get so bogged down in this that I forget to lift up my eyes and look at the fields and look to the harvest. We need to lift up our eyes and see the opportunities that we have to preach Christ. Because if we're honest, we're not at a loss for people to preach the gospel to. We're not wanting for people who are yet to hear about Christ, because they're everywhere and they're all around us. So the harvest is plentiful. That's the promise that Jesus gives. But the second thing that Jesus says there in Matthew chapter 9 is that there's a great problem. The great promise is that the harvest is plentiful, but the great problem is that the workers are few. There are not enough laborers. Again, you think about the work of harvesting and the work of farming. The more people you have, the easier it's going to be. Many hands make light work, as the expression goes. And this is what Jesus is facing at this time. There are far more people in need of help than there are doing the helping. Jesus says there in the text tells us in verse 35 that Jesus was going through the cities and villages, teaching the synagogues, proclaiming the gospel. That's Jesus doing that work. Jesus is doing those things. And he's working alone. He's on his own. He's doing this working hard at traveling and preaching and healing people. While in the flesh, Jesus gets exhausted, just like we do. While Christ was on this earth, he experienced fatigue. He experienced hard work. And that's what he's doing. He's overwhelmed and exhausted by this work that he's doing here on his own. So he says to the disciples, here's the problem. Here's the promise. The harvest is plentiful. The problem, the workers are few. The solution, verse 38. Therefore, beseech the Lord of the harvest to send out workers into the harvest. What's the first thing that Jesus says when there's a great problem presented with his work? Go to God. Go to God in prayer. Beseech the Lord of harvest to send out the workers. That's the priority, is going to God in prayer. Sometimes I think we look at prayer not as the first port of call when we face a problem, but rather it's, if I can't do anything practical to help, then I guess I'll pray about it. That's my bottom of the barrel solution. If I can't actually do anything, then I'll pray. But Jesus says, no, you've got that backwards. Jesus says, when we face this great problem, the first thing we're going to do is take it before the Lord of harvest. Take it before God. When we face something overwhelming, our first thought ought to be, bring it to God. Take it to Christ. Take it to the Lord. He says, pray for more workers. And I love the way he does this. He says there in verse 38, first thing you're going to do is you're going to pray to God for more workers. Then in chapter 10, then Jesus summoned his 12 disciples and gave them authority over unclean spirits and cast them out and to heal every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. Then he gives in verse 2 to 4, he gives a list of his disciples' names. And then verse 5 to verse 8 there, it says, these 12 Jesus sent out after instructing them, do not go in the way of the Gentiles and do not enter any city of the Samaritans, but rather go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. And as you go, preach, saying, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. Freely you received, freely give. He says, first thing you're going to do is you're going to pray to God for more laborers. Pray to God to send out workers. And he says, good news, God's answered the prayers. You guys are going to go out and you're going to be those workers. So what he does is he says the priority is going to God in prayer. And the second thing he does is he sends out the workers. The only way the field is going to be harvested is by people getting up and harvesting it, is by people doing the work. Yes, prayer is the first thing we need to do. Praying to God is the priority. And then God, in answering that prayer, is going to send people out to do that work and be involved in that work by people going out and harvesting. And Jesus sends them to do the same work that he's involved in. Again, when we looked at verse 35, what does it say he's doing? He's teaching, he's proclaiming the gospel, he's healing every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. And what does he say of his disciples? Heal the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons. He's saying, I'm going to get you to do the very same work that I'm involved in. All that I'm doing at the moment, and this great task that I'm looking at, as I'm working on my own, you're going to be doing that as well now. You are going to be the workers in the kingdom. The work that Jesus came to do, as we read in Luke 19:10, to seek and to save the lost. That is the work that he expects from his disciples. The very same work that Jesus came to this earth to be involved in is the work that he expects from his disciples. So today we still need more workers. Today we still need more workers in the field. And I think our solution ought to be the same as Jesus's. We pray. We need to be praying for workers. Pray that men will involve themselves in the work of preaching the gospel. Pray that people will be involved in going out into the field. Pray for those who continue in the work. Pray for the mission works we support. Pray for the individuals who are involved in preaching the gospel. Pray for the evangelistic work of the church. Pray for all these things. Thank you, sir. We need to pray for workers. But not only do we need to pray for workers, we also need to do what Jesus does next. We need to send out workers. We need to send out workers into the field. And that means equipping men to preach the gospel, equipping individuals to preach the gospel. Notice the first thing that Jesus does in Matthew chapter 10 and verse 1. Jesus summons his 12 disciples and he gave them authority over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal every kind of disease and every kind of sickness. You know, the first thing that Jesus does before sending out his disciples is he equips them with what they need to do the work. Now, Jesus' work is slightly different. The work that Jesus is involved in is in healing sicknesses and casting out diseases, casting out demons. Now, we don't do that today. But in the same sense, in the work that we need to be involved in, the preaching the gospel, the seeking the lost, what we need to do first is equip them. As Jesus equipped the disciples, we need to be equipping faithful men to preach the gospel. In 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 2, it says, "The things which you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also." We have this progression there in that passage. The things that Timothy has heard from Paul, he's supposed to entrust those to faithful men, and those faithful men are supposed to teach others also. And those others are supposed to teach others and teach others and teach others. It's a matter of equipping the saints for the work of evangelism. You know, maybe you're in a place right now where you feel like I want to be a worker in the kingdom. Maybe not in the vocational work of preaching, but maybe I want to be involved in evangelism. I want to be involved in the harvest. I just don't know what to do. I don't know how to lead a study. I don't know how to talk to someone about Christ. We have an opportunity there to equip one another, to help one another, to teach one another, to help one another involve ourselves in the work of evangelism. You know, we just had a couple of weeks ago someone come down from America to do a seminar on how we can be involved in world evangelism by sitting at home on our computers. What we had there was someone coming down and equipping us to teach others also. He was a faithful man coming to equip us to teach others also. That's what we need to be doing as a church, equipping ourselves to know how to preach the gospel to others and to know how to work in the harvest and in the field. But sometimes we can look at the field and we think, okay, we look at that map over there and say, there's the field. That's the field. And what an overwhelming task that is. See how big the world is. See how many people there are in the world. And we see that is an overwhelming task. But the field's not just out there. The field is in our local communities. The field is right here in Toowoomba. And we need to be involved in that. We need to be involved in reaching the lost in our own community. We need to be involved in the evangelism of the church. We need to be involved in our local community. And we always need to look for opportunities to preach the gospel and to tell others about Jesus. In Matthew chapter 9, Jesus gave this illustration, and he gave a great promise and a great problem. The promise is that the harvest is plentiful, and the problem is that the workers are few. But he also gave a solution. Send out workers. Send out workers in the field. As a church, as an individuals, we have a responsibility. As disciples of Christ, we have a responsibility to be in the work that Jesus came to do, in seeking and saving the lost. Let's consider ways, let's work with one another, let's work together as a church to seek and to save the lost and to send out workers into our own community. Let's conclude with the final song.